Kicking off the list at number 10. Ivan the Terrible. If his name didn't already give you a hint here, Ivan the Terrible was not a great lad. He was rather terrible. His Russian nickname translates to more than evil, so I figured who better to kick off this dark list with than this lad. The first Tsar of Russia back in the mid-1500s, okay. He created Russia's secret police. Ivan IV enjoyed harming members of nobility, and he did so in cruel ways. A ray of sunshine appeared in 1564, Ivan the Terrible officially resigned. And then a year later, however, he immediately came back, so yeah. And then he took control of 1/3 of the Muscovite realms. Not a retirement at all. Right back up on that ruling evil horse, I guess. And then in 1581, he took out his heir to the throne, literally like a Game of Thrones villain, so yeah, he's evil to all those around him and his own family. Number 9. Caligula. Of course we have to include Caligula on a list of evil lads. We've got to go back to ancient Rome for this one, returning the clocks back to 12 AD. The Roman Emperor Nero was already making headlines at this point. He was cruel as well, we'll talk about him later on. But then in comes Caligula to change the game in a weird and also cruel way. He loved spending money and showing off. He once had a 2-mile long boat, like a floating bridge, just so he could gallop back and forth on his horse. And then everyone was looking and they're like, oh great, cool horse and cool bridge guy. We're all so hungry. He would also order his troops to do odd things, like go into the sea and collect as many seashells as possible. Like that's something you do if you're 7 years old. You're like, I want all the seashells now. And they're like, you bet. And they collect them. They're like, do we listen for hints? Why are we doing this? He then built a fancy house for his horse in Citadus. Yeah, not a dog house, not like a shed, like a fancy, rich palace. Why, you ask? Well, because Caligula was on his way to appointing said horse into the high office. Yeah, Caligula was taken out sadly before this officially was completed, but he was very close to having his horse in the office of consul. Imagine losing your job to this guy's horse. Imagine the things he would have done. He was en route to do some bad stuff. What a weirdo. Number 8, Queen Ranavalona. The last queen of Madagascar, Queen Ranavalona. One of the worst historically. She had quite the temper, it seemed. She was born in 1788 and she ruled over the kingdom for 33 years in total. She's remembered as cruel, violent, and would often choose, violence first in order to preserve independence over the island. She's known as the most ruthless queen in history. After the death of her husband, she went mad with power almost instantly. In the late 1700s, King Adrian originally brought peace to the lands, but naturally there were traditionalists who opposed him. That's not new, we've seen every medieval show. There's people who aren't on board. The king's uncle at one point tried to take him out, but a local warned the king beforehand. And that king repaid said local by adopting his daughter, Ranavalona, and now she had to marry his son, Prince Radama. Now when said prince was alive, they didn't even get along. And come 1810, the king passed away, giving Ranavalona the promotion of a lifetime. But rumor has it, of course, is that Ranavalona poisoned the king. Just a rumor, but it is fitting as to what comes next. Ranavalona kept away the advances of the French and the British by leaving bodies of those who tried to attack prior out on display. Yeah, just sitting there on the beach. Like some Queen Cersei type stuff. I don't know. I've been watching a lot of Game of Thrones recently, a lot of evil people. In 1845, Queen Ranavalona ordered 50,000 subjects to build roads across the jungle for 4 months, this massive buffalo hunt, and well, 10,000 of those poor souls died of starvation during this and of course exhaustion. And not one buffalo was even hunted. Just poor leadership and deaths, a lot of deaths. Number 7, Jolly Jane Toppin. Okay, getting a little more recent for this one. In the 1880s, Jane Toppin, aka Jolly Jane, is now confessing to killing 31 people. And with that nickname and that many victims, yeah, I have to talk about her. Jolly Jane Toppin was a nurse working in Massachusetts. She would take care of the elderly, but instead of TLC, Jane would give them morphine and atropine. And to make things even more horrible, if such thing exists, Jane would lay next to her victim after she poisoned them and just would lie there while they were passing away. Yeah, evil, just evil and twisted, right? Just the worst thing ever. She managed to take the souls of 31 patients, but those numbers potentially reached the hundreds. She eventually and thankfully got caught and spent the remainder of her days lying alone in an asylum. Yeah, these killings began when she was younger after a boyfriend dumped her. That was the start of her mental decline, apparently. Number 6, George Chapman. Going back to the late 1800s again for this guy. He began his career as a Polish doctor, but in 1888, he moved to London, and that's when things got a little dicey. Once he arrived in London, Chapman sought out 4 mistresses. Not 3, not 2, 4, despite already being married beforehand, which you probably could have predicted. George was a doctor, he was the cheater, and you could have guessed it by the title of this list, he was also a killer. He poisoned all 4 of those mistresses with arsenic. Chapman was also thankfully caught and later was executed for these horrible crimes in 1903. This guy was so bad they actually thought perhaps this was Jack the Ripper, but that's been proven otherwise. Isn't that crazy? Like, oh, we thought you were this horrible person, but you're just your own unique horrible person. Nice. Now there's 2 of you. Horrible. Number 5, Anna Ivanova. Anna Ivanova, the cruel ice princess, aka the Empress of Russia back in 1730 to 1740. Where to begin? Okay, first of all, when you think ice princess, you want to put a magical spin on it, right? Because that's all we know. Well, this was Russia in the 1700s. This was not a magical fun time. Not a Disney princess, that's for sure. To celebrate their victory over the Ottoman Empire, Anna Ivanova gave the order to build an ice house, an ice palace rather, to celebrate the marriage of one of her maids and a prince. Sounds joyous almost, magical one would say. Thing is, these guys didn't know each other prior to getting married, so that was weird as is, right? Can't forget that detail. They were complete strangers, but then they were forced to marry each other in a freezing cold palace literally made of ice in the dead of night. They had to ride an elephant as well as a newlywed couple. Poor elephant. And all the guests, they were also forced to dress up like clowns for this entire party. So even if you weren't getting married, you were forced to be humiliated still. All in the name of said ice queen. Yeah, a little different than Frozen, I'd say. A little tiny bit different than Frozen. This Anna is not great. Number 4, Nero. Yeah, we gotta mention Nero. If we're gonna talk smack about Caligula and his high horse, literally, we gotta include Nero. This was ancient Rome back in 68 CE. Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. He burned down Rome. That's pretty bad. That's memorable, I'd say. Dare I say, even more memorable than a horse palace. It's a messed up family, okay. Nero was heir of the Emperor Claudius, the 5th Roman emperor. He wiped out his entire family in horrible, different, unique ways, dare I say. And historically, it's believed that Nero lit the fire that burned down Rome. But he made it look like the Christians did it. Once all was lost in the empire, Nero took his own life. Yeah, just all bad. Just bad leadership, bad Caligula and his horse, Nero, everything's burning. Rome was not pleasant, not a pleasant time. They had aqueducts and horrible history. Number 3, H.H. Holmes. His fascination with medicine began at a young age. He used to perform fictional surgeries on his stuffed animals, always a red flag, awesome. H.H. went on to medical school and shortly after finishing, he began killing people in order to steal their property. He then built himself this massive, terrifying custom house that he had to build to include things like secret passages, trapdoors, soundproof rooms, doors that locked from the outside with like gas jets on the inside. He even had a kiln to cremate his bodies. Is he the devil? I would say worse than the devil. I'd rather make a deal with the devil than meet H.H. Holmes any day, literally. Holmes gets close with women in order to take control of their finances and then later kill them, but he would also require his employees to fill out life insurance policies that named him as the beneficiary. Some of the bodies he even ended up selling to medical schools. How gross is that? Eventually, he was found out, nice, he was caught, and then sentenced, of course, to death. Not nearly enough times. It isn't exactly known how many victims he had, but it's thought to be somewhere over 200. Number 2, Elizabeth Bathory. The Hungarian noblewoman was everything but. Yeah, back in the late 16th century and even in the early 17th century, Elizabeth would meet young peasants and ask them to come work at her castle, right? This is a good day for peasants. She promised them a high-paying job as a servant. That's a way better deal than being broke outside of the castle, so many times, if not all the time, these poor folk would come back with her. When they arrived to the castle, that's when things would change. That's when the tone would kind of shift. She would then brutally harm them. She would trap them, torture them, really just all the worst of the worst. And then finally, once she was bored or ready for the next house guest to arrive, she would finish them off. The number of fatalities here is somewhere around 80 peasants, but historically the number has also gone up to 600 in some accounts. So 80 to 600. Okay, come 1611, things changed. She was locked up in her own castle with barely any sunlight, nice. She was feeling the weight of her actions. Hopefully she was learning a few lessons here, but 4 years later in 1614, she passed away. Yet next to Vlad the Impaler, she's been a large inspiration behind Bram Stoker's Dracula. Yeah, that's bad. That's really bad. Number 1, Mao Zedong. Okay, getting into some pretty high numbers here. The dictator of China from 1943 to 1976. Mao Zedong. He had this vision one day that China would be the superpower, the super country, and in order to do so, he tried to reshape China's economy and turn it into an industrial one. From 1958 to 1962, the Great Leap Forward policy ended up leading to the deaths of around 45 million people. This makes the Great Chinese Famine the largest in human history. Again, this is also an estimate. The deaths were somewhere around 30 to 60 million. That feels like a number 1 to me. I don't know. I'd say that's a number 1. Can't really rate evil and bad, but definitely can't put that at number 8, can we? Kicking off the list at number 10, Luigi Lucchini. Back in the late 1800s, the Empress Elizabeth of Austria was sadly taken out by a man named Luigi Lucchini. He wasn't a royal, he wasn't a long-lost son, he wasn't hired help, nothing like that. He was just somebody who wanted to attack a royal. Any royal, for that matter, just didn't, no reason at all. He didn't have anything against Empress Elizabeth per se, but come September 10th, 1898, he took the Empress's life. In his own admission, Luigi stated he had nothing against the Empress on a personal level, but what had really happened that day was Luigi had intended on taking the life of the Duke of Orleans. But Luigi arrived too late in Geneva, and the opportunity to do so had passed. He looked at a local newspaper then, saw Elizabeth, found out where she was staying, and then just waited for her to leave the hotel. Just like that. That is so scary. People are insane. That is just number 10. Number 9, Olga of Kiev. This one also feels like it's from Game of Thrones. Not much is known of the Ukrainian royal, but back in 903 AD, her ruling began. And history was never quite the same. Her husband was the soon-to-be Igor, ruler of the Kievan Rus. Come 945, the Drevilians prevailed and took out the king, leaving one Olga in charge. An angry, heartbroken Olga, that is. The Drevilians actually told Olga at this point to marry their own prince. They were adding insult to injury. How rude is that? So Olga said, sure. Yeah, let's do it. Send 20 men to talk about this arranged marriage, and let's do it. Let's get planning. You 20 go wait in the bathhouse, and we'll talk shop soon. So when the men arrived, she then locked the doors on said bathhouse, and then they never left. There's a lot of fire, really bad stuff. And that was just the beginning. Olga then invited 5,000 Drevilians over for a feast. Once everybody drank more than enough, she straight up wed-weddinged her entire company. It was awful. This was the same lady who promoted Christianity in history. She was a literal saint. Historically, we refer to her as a saint. How crazy is that? I mean, you know, war history and stuff, obviously times are different, but like this is dark. To physically do that to that many people is dark. It's all dark. History is dark. Everyone sucks. Number 8, King John of England. We've heard of Richard the Lionheart, but his brother, King John, not a pleasant fellow by any means. He was a pretty brutal king. He turned his back towards his family and friends and, of course, the country. His reign began in 1299, and by the time it ended in 1216, the country was screwed. It was pretty much bankrupt at that point. And that was the least of your concerns, though, if you knew King John personally. He had 12 illegitimate children, but afterwards he had all of their relatives and family taken out, just eliminated, just like that. If you looked at him the wrong way, you're going to jail. King John loved imprisoning people. He was so bad as a ruler that Robin Hood was actually inspired from his days of ruling. Yeah, we created myths to combat this maniacal ruler. He declared war against France. He stole from the church. He then ordered all clergy to leave. And in horrible historical fashion, Jewish people were also horribly singled out, and they had all their belongings stolen, and then they were then imprisoned, or worse, brutally punished. All for nothing. All because this clown was born. Number 7, Commodus. We mentioned Nero and Caligula in part 1, so why not dip our toes back in the ancient Roman waters again? Specifically 180 AD. Commodus wasn't exactly the most evil per se, but he didn't pay attention while he was in the driver's seat. He let things slide, he let things go south. He was too busy modeling himself after Hercules. He also portrayed himself as Hercules. I guess that's important, that's how you want to be remembered. Sure, great, that's one way to do it. But his love of the Roman games, that's where you start thinking, oh, something's up here. Maybe he is evil. Maybe he's actually quite evil all along. Who knew? Who would have thunk? He loved watching these Roman games so much that he finally entered himself. Yeah, he would just step in and brutally fight animals, humans, you name it. And then after it was done, he would charge the state a massive fee because, well, Commodus the mighty, holy Commodus, he made an appearance. And we're lucky, so now we should pay him. Okay, pal. He was so focused on how he wanted to be remembered in history that in 192 AD, he renamed Rome after himself. Yeah, and if that wasn't bad enough, he then changed all the 12 months to his 12 other names. A year later, when he was, you know, taken out, all the names were changed back immediately. So he has no idea. No one tell him. Number 6, King Henry VIII. Catherine Howard was the Queen of England from 1540 to 1541. That's such a short amount of time, but why? What happened? Well, Catherine Howard was the 5th wife of one King Henry VIII, cousin to Anne Boleyn, referred to by King Henry as his rose without a thorn. And he just gave her all the gifts. Just at 19 years old, here you go, everything you want, boom. It looked great at first, but their marriage only lasted 1 year. That's when rumors, not letters or eyewitnesses, no, rumors started spreading about infidelity. And this is a medieval time, so there was little evidence that suggested that she had been romantically involved with somebody beforehand, but that didn't matter. We had a jealous king, so anything he says goes. You had me at fifth wife, you know? She was then executed for adultery and treason at the Tower Green, February 13th, 1542. Number 5. Linda Hazard. Cool last name, kinda tips you off a little bit. She's been dubbed as the starvation doctor because back in the day, the late 1800s that is, if you somehow ended up in the office of one Linda Hazard, well, it didn't really matter what you were suffering with. Linda's advice, medical advice for pretty much everything that came in was too fast. A broken leg? No problem, just skip lunch. See how you feel. Give it time. Just a bad doctor, which is bad on one hand, but more than 40 of her patients ended up dying due to, you know, starvation. Yeah, you could have guessed. She had her own sanitarium in Washington that was appropriately named Starvation Heights. Yeah, she wasn't even trying to hide it too. She's like, yeah, I'll call it this. You would think after like, I don't know, 16 deaths, people would start asking questions. No, this is a long time ago. This is before a lot of things came into play. Eventually, Hazard was caught, convicted, and served 2 years in prison. And then 26 years later, in 1938, she herself died of, you guessed it, starvation. Don't take your own advice, Linda. It's not great advice. Number 4, Michael Swango. Going back to the 1980s for this one, kinda recent, okay? As a youngin', Michael Swango didn't play with Lego or K'NEX, my personal favorite. Instead, he would draw scenes of horrible crimes. Yeah, red flags, for sure. That went away for a bit when he grew up and got older, but when Michael later went to college, he decided to write his chemistry thesis on Georgy Markov. More specifically, he studied his horrific death caused by poison. Yeah, he was fascinated after that point. His newfound obsession was poisons, and how many lives they took historically, like ancient Roman days, you know, really going back. Odd thing to study, but okay. During his 3rd year at school, 5 patients that saw him ended up passing away afterwards. This happened often, it's happened more and more, but one individual luckily survived, and she remembered everything that happened. She remembered that Swango had injected her with something a minute before she started to experience seizures. He still got away with it somehow, but then later he went to another hospital in Ohio in 1984, and he handed out donuts that later made the staff feel sick. And then when they required treatment, he then poisoned them. He got caught, was then sentenced to 5 years, but was released after 2. He then changed his name, moved to Virginia, got a job as a career counselor, and then poisoned those co-workers as well. He got caught after doing this like 3 more times. Now he's finally serving 3 life sentences at ADX Supermax Federal Prison. It's hard to sum up in a minute or so with just how many things he's done, how many lives he's took. It's really bad, but I implore you to read more about him. The Poison Doctor. My gosh, I'm having nightmares tonight. Number 3, Thomas Cream. Thomas Neil Cream, TNC, another Canadian monster. Originally, he graduated from McGill back in 1876, and after that, he traveled to London, England. This was during the time of the Industrial Revolution, so the demand for doctors here was extremely high. Thomas was there for business, and apparently he was there for pleasure. He enjoyed London's nightlife a lot. He would dance, drink, hook up with strangers, just, you know, all the things you don't want your medical doctor doing just mere hours before shift. But on November 15th, 1892, there were thousands gathered outside the Newgate prison walls, eagerly awaiting the execution of one Dr. Thomas Cream. Well, now he's referred to as the Lambeth Poisoner. If you had the misfortune of seeing this doctor as well, odds are he too would have tried to poison you. Just because. Yeah, poison doctors, how common are these guys? He actually did get caught once. He was convicted of poisoning a woman, he was given life in prison, but apparently it's all about who you know. His brother bribed the governor of Illinois, so he poisoned 5 more people in London before eventually getting arrested again, and then finally executed, this time for a crowd. Number 2, Elizabeth Wettlaufer. The scariest people are the ones who abuse their power. I mean, doctors, evidently. I mean, historically, there have been some pretty evil ones. Elizabeth Wettlaufer is one of the worst, hands down. She was once a nurse at not one, but several long-term care facilities in southern Ontario. Really hitting close to home with this one. Elizabeth would use doses of insulin on their patients. That was her discreet way of taking lives, but it gets even worse. Dare I say, if you can believe that? After the patient had passed away, Elizabeth would then steal their belongings. In 2016, she quit her nursing job and then checked herself into a psychiatric hospital and confessed to all of her crimes. Those being 8 counts of first degree, 4 counts of attempted, and 2 counts of aggravated assault. Absolutely brutal. These happened from 2007 to 2016 in Woodstock, Ontario. Yeah, Woodstock of all places. Elizabeth is now in her late 50s serving 8 concurrent life sentences, but after 25 years, thanks to Canadian law, she gets a chance at parole. Scary, huh? Yep, I'd agree. And finally, number 1. Queen Isabella of Spain. Look, we got pretty dark on this list, so we'll peel back the layers of unholiness for our last one here. We'll go to the 15th century. We'll go to Queen Isabella of Spain. She once ruled with King Ferdinand II for a while. She ruled from 1451 to 1504. While in power, she forced Catholicism upon all. Yeah, if you were Jewish, you had to attend the Spanish court and then convert, and if not, the Queen tossed you out. Horrible stuff. Recently, however, there have been a few calls to have her monuments removed from Canadian parks. At McDonald's Park, for example, a monument has been up since 1958, and it's to honor the Queen's role in Columbus's arrival to the Americas. There's even a street named right after her, right across from the monument. Locals want all of it removed and or changed because, they're not fans of genocide. These changes are actively being made throughout Canada right now, which is nice to see. Ryerson University recently changed its name to Toronto Metropolitan University because of Edgerton Ryerson's previous ties with Canadian residential schools. So it's happening. Slowly but surely, changes are happening. Kicking off the list at number 10, the Bloody Benders. Not to be confused with the Peaky Blinders, although those lads are also trouble. The Bloody Benders, they too were a tight-knit family from the 1800s. The Benders were born and raised in Labette County, Kansas. Parents John and Elvira, with their son and daughter, John Jr. and Kate. The family didn't speak English too well, so they sadly couldn't make too many friends. Their daughter Kate was a known psychic as well. Mysterious family to say the least. Now cut to 1872, people are starting to go missing. Nobody's feeling safe anymore. Eventually word spread that the Bender family may have something to do with it. Okay, so upon further investigation, the Bender family fled their home immediately, and then that's when authorities found 9 bodies on their property, all in a secret room. So clearly the entire family had to be on board, so whatever hunch was happening, they were right. Hence why they all fled. Unless they're vampires, I don't think we have to worry about these guys anymore today, but still, how twisted, right? That's crazy. Families, right? Number 9, Wild Bill Longley. You're f***ed when Wild is in their name. Or Bill. Any Bill is bad news, really. Wild or Bill, this one's a bad one. Back in the 1860s, Wild Bill Longley just killed a man traveling through town. No act of violence or anything like that, he just decided to. And of course, this was the first of many for the twisted Bill Longley. 2 years later, Bill joined the army. He intended to stay for 5 years, but he left only after 2. As soon as he got back home to Austin County, he killed another man for seemingly no reason. And then he took out his childhood best friend for, again, reasons unknown. And then he left town entirely. Cut to 1876, he killed 2 more people. Shocker. And finally, come 1877, he was arrested and finally executed. His name was unspoken until 1958. That's when actor Steve McQueen portrayed Wild Bill Longley in a Tales of Wells Fargo episode. Pretty dark. People are I don't even know how to say anything funny. I'm like, yeah, part 3, people are pretty messed up. Number 8, Jack the Ripper. We've heard his name for many years, but who was Jack the Ripper and just how bad was he? Spoiler alert, he was pretty bad. He was horrible. One of the worst. When talking about serial killers, Jack the Ripper is still unidentified. He would target sex workers in East London neighborhoods back in the late 1800s. He has been connected to 5 killings, and after thorough investigations, he was still never found. His identity is still unknown. It's one of those true crime stories where it makes you mad that we didn't find him, but at the same time, there's some relief that this was so long ago and he's for sure dead. Again, unless he's a vampire, this monster is gone. Number 7, the Werewolf of Dole. Now, speaking of monsters, okay, I lied. As far as haunting nicknames go, this guy takes the cake. This is horrible. The Werewolf of Dole. This man was a serial killer back in the 16th century, and the small town of Dole recalls this man, Giles Garnier. He would identify himself as a walking, talking, breathing werewolf. Yeah, he would walk all hunched over and stalk his victims before ultimately ending their life. How horrible is that? These people are real. Garnier confessed to killing 4 people, but beforehand, he was apparently given a special elixir by the devil himself. That's what apparently gave him said werewolf properties. Cut to January 1573, the Werewolf of Dyer was hunted and executed publicly. Classic, so dark, always public. Everything's so public and horrible. Imagine walking home and you're like, what's the werewolf? What's going on? What's going on in that town? Number 6, Burke and Hare. Ah yes, another 2-for-1. We love those on Most Amazing. These monsters were kicking back in the late 1820s. Now at this time in Edinburgh, Scotland, the medical science community was on the up and up. But in order to study new medicines to, avoid the next plague and all, they needed deceased bodies. Not a lot of folks volunteering their loved ones, so that's when these guys would come in. These two Irish brothers, they killed 17 people over 2 years, and then they proceeded to sell their corpses to Dr. Robert Knox, all for a little bit of cash, all in the name of science. How disgusting is that? It took 17 killings before somebody caught on to this horrible system. They would suffocate them in a way that's now referenced as burking. They got their own name. That's horrible. That's how much of an impact this guy's left. Their methods were just cruel. They would invite people into their lodge to then, kill them. Hare testified against Burke, so Burke got the old gallows treatment. But then it gets worse for the lad, believe it or not. He was publicly dissected. His skeleton is actually still on display at the Edinburgh Medical College Museum to this day. Got a whole museum, it's just a skeleton. So if you want to go curse at this man's femur, go ahead. Go tell him. Go tell him Taylor McWater sent ya. Also, say hi to my family. I love Edinburgh. I want to come back soon. Number 5. Locked away. Heading back to the 1760s, the Crown Prince Sado of Korea. He was a very, very cruel prince. He enjoyed getting involved in parties, sexually explicit parties, if you catch my drift. I don't know why I'm doing this, but I'm sure there was a lot of this going on in those parties. He would light his clothes on fire just for the hell of it. And also, I almost forgot one important part. He enjoyed killing people in his castle every day for no reason. Again, monster. A couple people a day, yeah, just because he could get away with it. His father finally decided to do something about the situation because, well, Prince Sado was starting to attack his own family members. For years, he was killing random civilians, but now that the family's threatened, now it's an issue. Yeah, nice. That's when dad steps in. Great, we love a family man, thanks. His father ended up doing something pretty horrible, I'm not gonna lie, this is pretty dark. His father ended up locking him in a rice chest, like a literal small, like a treasure chest size chest, for the rest of his life. Yeah, the prince was locked away, not in a tower, but a chest. His body was discovered 8 days after it had been locked up. Yeah, that sound you just made, I made the same noise when I read it, and I was like, oh, gotta include that. Just a chest with a body, it's so gross. Imagine the smell. Let's move on. Number 4, Julia Tofana. Aqua Tofana was a cosmetic that was sold to women in the early 1630s. Now, it was a cosmetic that doubled down as a poison. A secret poison. The origins of said deadly cosmetic that was sold and responsible for around 600 deaths is pretty wild. Back in 1632, two women, Francesca Lasarda and Teofana Diadamo, they both created this poison that looked like makeup, right? So that when their husbands kissed them on the cheek, they would then be poisoned through skin contact and they would never know it, right? Eventually, Teofana was caught and executed for her crimes, but her recipe carried on through her daughter, Julia Tofana. She took this deadly recipe to Rome and then kept manufacturing it. Over 50 years, she took out more than 600 people with this recipe. She confessed to these hundreds of crimes in 1695 before also being publicly executed. Inside this cursed cosmetic was arsenic, lead, and belladonna, all colorless, tasteless, and historically one of the deadliest. I'm never kissing anyone on the cheeks ever again. You know how often I would do that, my lady? So dangerous. Number 3, Elmer McCurdy. This one's insane, dare I say a little bit funny, so I had to include it before we finish off with the real dark stuff. Elmer McCurdy, okay, back in 1911, he decided to be a rootin' tootin' criminal. He attempted to rob a train. Yeah, what a monster, right? Not like the worst of the worst, but still wouldn't recommend it, okay? Unbeknownst to him, said train was not full of gold back in the 1900s. It wasn't a gold rush, but it was rather full of passengers. So he collected a whopping $46, which honestly back then wasn't bad. But then he was quickly shot by a lawman. This is when things start to get insane. This is why I have to include it in our list today. Elmer's body was embalmed and then sold to the undertaker and then sold to this traveling carnival. His body was an exhibit almost. And for the next 60 years, his body, this prop rather, was passed around and sold between haunted houses and wax museums. They would tell the story that I just told you. Now eventually the guy's body, his real body, mummified body, don't forget, ended up in California at an amusement park funhouse at Long Beach. So now, come 1976, there's a crew there filming for the $6 Million Man. And that's when Elmer's finger broke off, revealing that it was an actual real-life mummy and not just a prop this entire time. Yeah, what a find. They went to film the $6 Million Man and ended up finding the $46 man. How gross is that? That's a real finger. That's not a prop, that is a real finger. Number 2, John Bodkin Adams. He was once a general practitioner in the British community in Essex. Most of his patients were elderly and he treated his elderly patients with anything but care. See, from 1946 to 1956, John had around 160 patients that died suspiciously, and out of those 160, 132 of them all left their valuables over for him. Wow, what are the odds? He must have been a really great guy. It must have been some really great care that he was providing, right? It's not fishy at all. Of course, the wills were later found out to be fraud because, well, as per this list, it's the worst of all. Worst part of all this, John was acquitted after these crimes. His trial established that the doctrine of double effect, which is where a doctor giving treatment with the aim of relieving pain, may lawfully, as an unintentional result, shorten life. He's like, hey, sometimes it happens. They're like, that many times? I don't think that should happen that many times. You're in the triple digits, my dude. So out of the dozens and dozens of cases that ended horribly, Adams was only charged for 2 of them. He wasn't convicted of their deaths even in this case. He was just guilty of forging prescriptions and falsifying medical forms. So not even what he should have gotten for the 2 out of the hundreds. He even reopened his practice, but this time around, patients avoided him. Yeah, no one ended up talking to that guy. That's insane. That's where the law comes in and then makes a horrible situation even worse. You're like, really? And finally, number 1. The Lane's Angels of Death. Gotta finish on this horrible foreign one, here we go. Since we're closing off this part 3 on real people scarier than the devil, we have to mention the Lane's Angels of Death. Yeah, were they a motorcycle squad from the 80s? Were they cool and had big mustaches? No, no, no. No, they were a group of Australian nurses, yeah, working at the 4th largest medical facility in Vienna. At that time, it had over 2,000 staff members walking and talking through the building, including these 4 angels of death: Waltraud Wagner, Maria Gruber, Irene Ladoff, and Stefania Meyer. All nicknamed the Angels of Death. What a nice little squad, cool. They were responsible for taking the lives of 49 patients, monsters. They would use doses of morphine. They were this disgusting squad of nurses, but eventually they couldn't keep their mouths shut about their wrongdoings, and thankfully someone overheard them talking about their latest crime one night at a bar, so they were caught. And then in February 1989, all 4 were arrested as they all confessed to the killings. 2 of the 4, Meyer and Gruber, they got lighter sentences. They got manslaughter and were released a few years later, so oh, okay. And then cut to 2008, the other 2, Wagner and Ladoff, the big bad worst 2, dare I say worst 2 of the bunch, they were also released and have since changed their name. Friendly reminder that they're still out there. Awesome.
Starting us off at number 10 is The Thief. So this was shared by someone whose mum worked as a manager at Walmart. One day she came home proper surprise, and obviously the kid asked what happened that day. That day at work, a woman was caught trying to steal one of the prepaid phones on display. Now when the security guard caught her, she pulled out the knife she'd been using to open up the phone's packaging to cut him open. But before doing that, she cut herself first and then screamed about how she had AIDS and now how the guard had AIDS as well, all because he was trying to stop her from taking the phone. The story is honestly all over the place. I don't even know what to say to you guys. I swear the first rule they teach you in retail is never chase or try and apprehend anyone that's trying to steal, but they also never ended that sentence with because the thief may give you AIDS, but maybe they should start doing that. I've never chased someone that stole something from the store I worked at. Like, off you go. Coming in at number 9 is asphyxiation. I honestly have no idea what is happening in this picture, but the mum of this child is pushing the car while her daughter is sitting in the child seat part of the trolley, which is normal, that's all good, except for the fact the kid has a plastic bag over her head. Like, I'm sorry? The mum put that over her head, or does she do it herself? If it's the former, someone call CPS, and if it's the latter, why is the mum not doing anything? Again, call CPS. When I was young, I remember seeing so many movies where someone would be getting tortured or interrogated, and asphyxiation with a plastic bag is how they'd kill the person. So I feel like if I saw this in real life at a Walmart, I'd actually intervene and be like, what is going on? What is you doing? That is not okay. At number 8, we have piss. It's a Walmart video, you guys. I'm gonna make the titles as ratchet as the store itself. Deal with it. Sue me. So this story came from a former employee who shared that one day a woman came in, bought a bottle of perfume, and then went to the bathroom. And give me a minute, because I don't even want to imagine the breeding cesspool of filth that would be a Walmart bathroom, so you already know she's going to be doing some whack in there. Turns out she was. She poured the perfume into her own bottle that she brought and then filled the actual perfume bottle by pissing in it. And that's not even the worst part. She then had the nerve and audacity to try and return this perfume bottle full of her own piss. The employee in question happened to be working cash that day and was like, okay, this is clearly a bottle of piss, and then called their manager, and the manager had clearly had enough and was just like, just process the return, just do it, don't ask questions. The bottle was evidently still warm from how fresh the urine was. Like, what kind of psycho does that? I would not, if I was working cash, you bet your ass I'm not processing your piss as a return. I'm not refunding you for that. Or I hope she at least dried the bottle. I don't want to be touching your piss. Filling item 7 slot is the big baby. So this picture was shared on People of Walmart back in 2009, and it appears to be an old man dressed as a big baby. He's equipped with a baby bag, a diaper, pacifier, outfit and all. And it has no context whatsoever, so I don't know if he was just dressed like that for fun or if he perhaps has Peter Pan syndrome. Now PPS is when someone either does not want to grow up or they're unable to do so the person ends up being an adult with the mind of a child. So if it's the latter, I don't want to say anything because it's not that person's fault they're suffering, but if he just came there dressed like that to creep people out, it 100% worked. I would walk in the complete opposite direction of this dude and not even make eye contact, to be honest. Now, item 6 is the goat. This one made me laugh so hard because I genuinely had no idea what I was looking at before I opened up the picture. I was like, is that E.T.? Is that some kind of alien? Like, what is that creature? Someone just tell me. Anyway, when I opened it up, I realized this woman was carrying a goat in a baby carrier strapped to her back. And what sent me about this one was how the goat's legs are like this around the woman's back and she's wearing a jumper, and I'm like, what is going on here? Like, did the woman never have a kid and so it was just compensating by carrying around this goat? Where's the goat's real mom, and is she in distress because her baby isn't with her? If I saw this, I would legit be on my way straight out of the store like, nah, that's not happening. That's not me. We're not doing that. It was a cute goat though, I'm not gonna lie. Coming in at number 5 is the Walmart killer. This was shared by Reddit user Sonic Underground, who said on their first day working at Walmart, a customer was in the fan aisle, so the user decided to go help him out. You know when you're a first day employee, all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, not knowing retail will suck your soul out. Either way, the man was holding 2 box fans, not knowing which one to buy, so he proceeds to ask the user. The user then asks him what size he's looking for what room, and so forth, and at the end makes a very sound recommendation. The customer then shouts "sucker" at the user, slaps the recommended fan out of their hand, and then runs to the cashier with the other one. I feel like clearly no one cares about this employee's opinion. Dumbfounded, the user was like, what the hell just happened to me? And their co-workers joined the user in the aisle laughing, saying that that customer was a regular and he was insane, and also convinced Walmart was trying to kill him. So to try and beat this company's attempts, he would ask the staff what he should buy and then go against their recommendation because it was clearly booby-trapped. That's all I'm gonna say. At number 4 is the girl. Now again, I'm gonna preface this with the fact I don't kink shame anyone. However, I would have been very troubled by the sight of this, I'm not gonna lie. Shared by Redditor BB Rodriguez, who is an overnight stalker at a Florida Walmart, she shared that once a really pretty girl came in wearing this leather bondage lingerie looking outfit. And I mean, that's fine, BDSM is so common. However, she was on a dog leash on all fours being walked by 3 older Caucasian men who looked to be meth heads. She was barking all over the store, and employees asked her several times if she needed help, but all she did was bark back at them. The men then paraded her around the store for an hour before buying her a chew toy and leaving. Mind you, it was 3 bloody AM on a Tuesday. Like, was this girl in her right mind? But I can't even go into this, we're a PG channel. I get roleplay and staying in character, but like, do you need help? Blink twice for yes. Or even just bark once for yes. Filling item 3 slot is the lack of restraint. This one was shared by someone that worked as an overnight stock employee at Walmart. She shared that one night a guy came in drunk out of his mind, which I feel like is no surprise at Walmart. She was bent down filling a bottom shelf with green beans, and when she looked up, this guy was this close to her with his out. He then asked her if she would perform fellatio on him for $50. She didn't even dignify him with a response, she just ran to her manager, and when the manager finally tracked him down in the store, he was in nothing but his underwear, rubbing and pleasuring himself on a pair of women's underwear. Whose underwear was it? No clue. Either way, he was arrested shortly after. Why do people get harassed when they're at work? Like, that pisses me off to no extent. You cannot harass man or woman at work. I will fight you, legitimately. I'm not even worried about it. Now, at number 2 is El Paso. Back in August of last year, a mass shooting took place at a Walmart in El Paso, which killed 20 people and badly injured more than 24 others. The victims ranged from being 35 to 82 years old, and 9 of them were in critical condition at the hospital after the fact. The police managed to arrest a 21-year-old perpetrator who had apparently written a manifesto confessing the crime was racially motivated. Calls started coming to the police at 10 AM the day of, saying that's when the whole incident started. As shocking and sad as that that is anyone really surprised? I feel like last year there was so many mass shootings in the US, I literally can't even count them on 2 hands, let alone every limb on my body. You heard it first. Actually, you didn't hear it first because it's everywhere. Listen. And finally, at number 1 is the treasure. So this one is really messed up and was shared by Reddit user Mike Michaels, who was a former employee. Mike shared that once a very dirty old homeless man came into the store and asked him to ring him up at the cashier. While there, the man kept one hand inside his jacket and kept looking over his shoulder and just acting super shady and sus. Now Mike didn't think much of it, but he was wary nonetheless and was just trying to scan the items as quickly as possible so the guy would leave. Then all of a sudden the guy looks him straight in the eye and asks, "Do you want to see my treasure?" with the creepiest smile on his face. Now Mike's mind was racing. Did he have a gun in his jacket? Was it a bomb? An actual piece of treasure? The possibilities were endless and the risk was very high. Before even answering, the guy then slowly opened his jacket to reveal a newborn puppy, still slimy, barely even moving, still covered in blood with its umbilical cord very much attached. Like, what the f***? Mind my language, but what the f***? Like, did he find a dog that had given birth and just take a puppy? Like, what the f*** is this? I'm sorry. Beat me out as much as you need to. That's just not on. I hate it, and the puppy probably didn't survive because it needs its mum, right? Thank you, stupid homeless man. Starting us off with number 10 is Thanksgiving turkey. User Mash Skulls shared that about a month ago they had sleep paralysis. One morning they started hearing this distorted, deep, unfamiliar voice. They started hearing more than one voice and tried to move or wake up, but they couldn't. And this is where it gets really freaking screwed up. The user saw a bunch of faceless men with razor sharp teeth coming towards them, grinding their teeth as they went. They were whispering food, food, food over and over again and were legit holding knives and forks. Now imagine being unable to control or move your body as these cannibal creatures just coming towards you. Now they surrounded the user, climbed on top of them, and then carved them like a turkey. It gets graphic. They tore the user limb from limb. They went headfirst into the rest of their body like a bunch of starving hyenas. The user watched them take her own finger bones and use them as toothpicks. Can you even, I don't even want to imagine this. The user literally had to listen to Beethoven for 3 hours after the dream just to get the image of being eaten alive out of their head. And honestly, I don't even know what I would do in that position. Probably not Beethoven, maybe Mozart. Coming in at number 9 are the cats. I will shamelessly try and include cats in every video if I can. I don't even care. I don't even care if it's relevant. Anyway, this story comes from Redditor Gave a Sky, who said they recently had a dream they were in an apartment with a few cats. That's just my dream. I mean, that's my life actually. Anyway, everything seemed pretty normal and very real until one of the cats literally up and jumped out of the balcony. The person was a bit wary, so they sat in the kitchen just to collect their thoughts. Then one of the cats just sits next to them on a different chair, except the user just can't look at the cat. It felt like looking at the sun. The cat wasn't even bright, but they just couldn't look at it. Out of the periphery of their vision, they realized the cat was morphing into something else entirely. This menacing creature with a disturbing face. It morphed into some humanoid creature and the user couldn't see its body, but its face was pale and square and had no features whatsoever except 2 eyes. The user immediately feels like the whole world is just closing in on them and they wake up, but the creature is still there, getting closer. Realizing they're not actually awake yet, they somehow willed their unconscious body to fall off the bed in order to actually wake up. They ended up blacking out after they fell off the bed and refused to sleep alone for 4 days. Honestly, this is very impressive that they willed themselves to wake up when they were asleep. I feel like I wouldn't even know how to do that. At number 8 we have the woman. Honestly, I feel like everyone can somehow relate to this story and I'll tell you why after. So this person shared one of the most terrifying dreams and said they actually suffer from really bad sleep paralysis. They have a rocking chair in their bedroom and I don't know why they do. That's literally the first thing to get haunted, if anything. Like, why? Either way, one night they were laying on their bed unable to move and they looked at the chair. There was a pale grey woman on the chair with blonde hair who was crying her eyes out while staring at the storyteller. And while she was crying her eyes out, she was also pulling out her insides. The person closed their eyes and they were trying everything to not see this right now, and then they felt this heavy pressure on their chest. They opened their eyes and saw this woman sitting on their chest pulling out her inner organs. The storyteller was so terrified they peed themselves, and mind you, they were 20 years old at the time. I can't even imagine the horror this person must have been going through, and I always think, honestly, why I said it was relatable is because I always think my chair with a bunch of laundry on top is a person in the dark, and I know a lot of other people get scared of that as well, so I was like, oh my god, hashtag relatable, but with the organ pulling woman, I'm just like, I hope that's not relatable. Please. Filling our number 7 slot is Gracie's mum, not to be confused with Stacy's mum. Reddit user Rakis11 shared the story of how when she was 5 years old she had her first ever nightmare, but things didn't really end even after she woke up. In her dream she was at her friend Gracie's house and they were drawing on her deck with chalk, and mind you, she lived on a cliff near the seaside. Views for days. Either way, Gracie's mum came out and yelled at the girls for drawing on the deck, and then her mum started turning into something evil. She was getting uglier and uglier, and her skin had just changed shades like 4 times. The user could see this happening, but Gracie had no idea what was going on. Either way, the mum realizes the user knows she's evil and throws them both off the cliff, and that's when she woke up. Now a few weeks pass after this dream, and then one day Gracie isn't at school. Apparently Gracie had drowned in the pool at her house, and her parents had filled the pool in, got divorced, and moved straight away, which is sus as hell. Either way, 8 years later, the user's brother, who wasn't even born at the time of the incident, was just walking on a trail near Gracie's old house, and he goes, "Gracie says hello." The user was like, "What are you talking about, Cam?" And all he said was, "The wet girl." The user never told her brother about Gracie, he had no idea it even happened. But I feel like her dream about the evil mum had something to do with what really happened. Like, it's just too suspicious for like a couple's kid to die and then quickly just like fill up the pool and just move away. Like, it's something just not sitting right with me. Now at number 6 is The Mask. This one was shared by an anonymous person who said one night he was watching TV in bed when out of nowhere his TV just went black. Despite turning it on from the remote a bunch of times, it just wasn't working, which was weird since this had never happened before. Either way, while trying to get it to work, he ended up falling asleep. He started feeling this huge pressure on his chest and his face was getting pushed to look at the wall. Now something or someone was grabbing his face and turning it to face the ceiling now with such force he thought his jawbone was about to break. When he opened his eyes in this state, he saw this massive black figure on top of him with a mask as a face that was fixed in the creepiest smile. But it wasn't even a proper mask, the thing had just drawn it on itself. It puts its finger on the guy's lips and just says shh. He then literally fainted from fear, and when he woke up he made a beeline for his mum's room. And honestly, as any honest adult, I would do the same. No shame. Go to mommy's room straight away. She can protect you from all. Now coming in at number 5 is The Darkness. Now this one's from Redditor The Pixel Mouse, who has this recurring dream about a creature she dubbed The Darkness. The monster appears in 2 forms. The first is in human form at a crowded place like a mall for example, and she won't even realize it's there until it starts appearing everywhere around her, and then everyone else just disappears. At this point the darkness starts running at her in super speed, and as soon as it grabs her, she wakes up. In the second rarer form, she'll randomly be in a room in her house, and as she goes into another room it'll go dark straight away and she'll know she's about to get royally screwed over. Like, at least she's self-aware, she knows it's happening, she knows it's coming. Even if she tries to escape this dark room, she gets pulled back in, so she just literally closes her eyes, waits for the darkness to grab her, and then she wakes up. The only thing she knows about its form is that it has long sharp fingers, because that's all she's ever really touched. Man's eyes are closed for the rest of the time, so the monster could literally take any true form. None of us will ever know. At number 4 is The Little Girl. This one's from Reddit user Pretends He Knows Stuff, who said one summer a few years ago he had a super high fever and sleep paralysis, which is probably the shittiest combo ever. Throw diarrhea into the mix and then it'd really be the shittiest combo. Pun intended. Anyway, that night he had a dream that everyone he knew was crying over this little girl, and when he got close to her he realized why. The girl was missing half of her face, and the guy said what a shame to her, and all of a sudden the room went grey. I love how this girl's face is half missing and all he said was what a shame. Like, you can come up with something better than that. Anyway, in this grey room he wakes up and sees the girl inches from his face, and all she keeps saying is "you did this to me." Except after saying it a bunch of times, she's not a little girl anymore, now she's like an elderly woman, and then that woman goes and jumps on his chest. Like, grandma's into acrobatics lately. The guy thought his lungs were burning up, and he claims that he actually prays every day still still that that dream never happens to him again. May God be with you. Filling our number 3 slot is the spider. This one was shared by an anonymous user who said they dreamt they were walking through a wasteland, probably from Fallout. The game Fallout, if you guys know it, you probably do. Either way, they were with a group of people they didn't know, and everything was a weird shade of either green or black. Like no other color even existed in this dream. Either way, they entered into a ruined building and they found someone crouched down on the ground with their back to them. For some weird dream logic reason, the person just knew they knew the person who was crouching down. They were so relieved, and as they went to touch the crouched person on the shoulder, everything became slow motion, like they were underwater almost. As they touched the person's shoulder, everything became normal speed again, and they turned around to look at each other. Except this person, they didn't know them. The person had one eye, and instead of having an iris or pupils or even whites, it was just a freaking spider as an eye. A black spider, and the bits that should have been white were green. The person literally jumped awake, and only when they were awake did they realize that thing was their sister. 20 years on, they remember the dream in such vivid detail, which goes to show how much it really scarred them. I hate insects, so if I saw a cyclops person with a spider for an eye, I would off myself. There's no hope for me now. Done with it? I don't want to be on this planet anymore. Now at number 2 is the 2-part Banshee. So this also came from an anonymous person, and they recall 2 slightly linked dreams that they had when they were 7 years old and one right now. In the first dream, they were laying in bed trying to sleep. Bored, they were like, let me just look at the shadows on my wall till I fall asleep. But the more they noticed the shadows, the faster the shadows started moving until they fully came off the walls. They started tugging at the person's feet, and all of a sudden 3 toddlers climbed onto the bed, and if that wasn't creepy enough, they all had glowing yellow eyes. Like great, honestly, what else can go wrong? Love it. Simultaneously, the 3 babies let out the most high-pitched scream the person had ever heard before pulling them off the bed. And that was the first dream, which all in all was horrific but doable. Years and years later, the person had another dream. They were walking to the bathroom to get something from their cabinet, and as soon as they closed it, they hear the same high-pitched scream that the toddlers had let out all those years ago. When the person looked into the mirror on the cabinet, they saw that the bathtub behind them was full of blood, and a little girl was standing in the middle of it holding a freaking knife. Now the person who was looking at this started fainting in slow motion, and as they were falling, everything just started glitching and distorting, and the girl in the tub was just smiling and smiling as she moved towards the person. I just have to take a few deep breaths to digest this story. Even though I've already read it since I've written about it, I still need to digest it again because that was too much. And finally, at number 1 is the basement. According to Flugu, which is this girl's username, when she was 8 years old, she used to have this recurring dream that wouldn't stop for months. She even forced herself to stay awake for 3 whole days just so she wouldn't have to see this dream again. And honestly, if that doesn't set this story up well, nothing will. Now in her dream, she's in her basement with her sisters getting something to drink when all of a sudden her sisters' faces just start getting really weird. Their noses and mouths start shrinking, and their eyes take up 90% of their face. The girl starts screaming and running up the stairs, but the sister creatures grab her neck and pull her down the stairs. By the time she's fallen down all these stairs and reached the bottom, one of the sister creatures pulls her up from the neck. When the girl looks at the creature, her face becomes oddly normal and human, except it's not human. She seems to have like another layer of skin on top of her face, and before the Flugu can even figure out what the hell is going on, the creature starts screaming like a demon, and all she can do is scream out of fear in response. The dream was so bad that the first time she had it, her mum told her she screamed for 3 hours straight before waking up. And that last bit really got to me because like how terrified you have to be to like literally be screaming 3 hours when you're unconscious. It's getting me in the feels, it's making me feel a type of way.
Number 10. The Long Island Killer. Active from 1996 to 2010, the Long Island Killer managed to avoid prison by simply avoiding being caught at all. When 24-year-old Shannon Gilbert called 911 in the summer of 2010, her only words were a simple, "They are trying to kill me." After that, Shannon was never seen again, prompting the Suffolk County Police Department to begin their search. On December of that same year, the police made a startling discovery. Along Ocean Parkway was a skeleton, packed away in a burlap bag and buried by snow. But that wasn't the only one they found. Over the course of the summer, more and more bodies were discovered by police, each one relating to a previous missing persons case, the oldest going back to 1996. The worst thing? While all of these bodies were found, their killer never was, and remains at large to this day. Their victims being Maureen Brainard, Melissa Barthélemy, Megan Waterman, Amber Costello, Jessica Taylor, an unidentified Asian person, Valerie Mack, 2 more unidentified women, and Shannon Gilbert. Number 9. Laszlo Sátori. Born in Austria-Hungary in 1915, Laszlo Sátori was hired as a member of the Royal Hungarian Police in 1944. From there, he organized the deportation of over 15,000 Jewish people to Auschwitz. But when the war ended, he was tried for his crimes and sentenced to death. However, in 1949, Sátori made his escape to Canada, becoming a citizen 6 years later. He remained in the country for the next 40 years, but when it was discovered that he'd falsified his citizenship documents, Sátori was deported back to Hungary. He lived there for another 10 years, until reporters from the British publication The Sun revealed his address in July 2012. From there, a whirlwind of charges were pressed against him, the Justice Minister of Slovakia having readied a case. It was all for naught, however, as on August of 2013, Laszlo Sátori passed away from pneumonia, the 98-year-old war criminal having lived for nearly a century without knowing justice, and the families of his victims never knowing peace. Number 8. The Doodler. In 1974, the San Francisco area was struck with a series of murders that would continue for the next year and a half, specifically targeting the patrons of gay bars. The Doodler received his nickname for making sketches of his victims prior to taking their life. All of the victims shared similar wounds, but not all of them did actually pass on. Several victims survived the attempts on their lives, but most of them refused to testify for fear of outing themselves due to the widespread homophobia of the time. As a result, Gerald Kavanaugh, Joseph Stevens, Klaus Christman, Warren Andrews, Frederick Kappen, and Harold Goldberg may never know peace. The case remains open to this day, with police having recently begun to use modern technology in an attempt to locate the Doodler. 7. Daji. Also known as Su Daji, this woman was the favored concubine of King Zhou of the Shang dynasty. Born in 1076 BC, Daji was born to the household of Yosu, which was captured by the Zhou and Daji taken as a trophy. With his love for her, Zhou went out of his way to do whatever he could to please his new mistress. As her time in the palace went on, Daji's requests became more depraved and violent. She began experimenting on the population, inventing new and increasingly brutal ways of executing her victims to sate her curiosity. Daji was executed by her lover's successor, King Wu of Zhou, later being used as the reason why King Wu took over the kingdom in the first place. Number 6. The Babysitter. From the time span of February 1976 to March of 1977, 4 Mark Stebbins, Jill Robinson, Christine Milhalik, and Timothy King went missing in Oakland County. Each time a child went missing, their bodies were found in open spaces, in front of office buildings, alongside roads, and dropped within ditches. Coroners determined that were tortured before their passing, each one showing signs of having been held by the killer. While DNA profiles were taken from the bodies, matches had never been found. Numerous people were suspected, and while several other deaths were suspected to be the work of the babysitter, none were ever completely connected. The case has been reopened multiple times, and while several other criminals have been caught as a result, the babysitter remains at large. Number 5. Joseph Kony. Founder and current leader of the Lord's Resistance Army, Joseph Kony is a terrorist that has been active in and around Uganda since 19 1987, a brutal Christian fundamentalist whose trademark has been his employment of child soldiers. Kony's victims range in the hundreds of thousands, though the exact number has never been confirmed, and his methods of indicting new soldiers is even more disturbing. A number of movements have been started with the end goal of capturing Joseph Kony, including Kony 2012, a massive online activist movement led by filmmaker Jason Russell. The United Nations and Ugandan government have also tried numerous operations to take down Kony. None have proven successful. However, according to recent reports, his forces have dwindled down from thousands to mere hundreds. And while he hasn't been captured yet, experts presume that it could happen any day. Number 4. Suharto. On the 1st of October, an organization of Indonesian revolutionaries assassinated 8 generals in an attempted coup d'etat. The Indonesian government's response to this was to immediately blame the Communist Party of Indonesia, better known as PKI. The leader of this movement was Suharto, who proceeded to kill anyone with even a passing association with PKI. These killings were supported by a number of Western powers, including the US. Starting in Jakarta, this purge swept across the country, with between 500,000 and 1 million victims in its wake. Suharto then seized the government for himself, assuming the title of second president of Indonesia. He completely upended the previous government, filling the staff only with those who supported him. He would rule for another 30 years before stepping down, never tried for his crimes, and passing away from multiple organ failure. Number 3. Pol Pot. Beginning life as Salith Sar, Pol Pot was a Cambodian communist revolutionary and the founder of the Khmer Rouge movement. Following the Cambodian Civil War, he took power as Prime Minister of Democratic Kampuchea, ruling for 2 years. His primary goal was to turn Cambodia into an agrarian socialist society, which he enforced through social control and cultural and lingual fascism. His most egregious act was the perpetration of the Cambodian genocide, a mass killing that resulted in the deaths of somewhere between 1.5 to 2 million civilians. He accomplished this through forced labor camps, where those seen as people against the state were sentenced to brutal work. They were also known as the killing fields, and when the Vietnamese army invaded, their soldiers found mass graves. In 1998, Pol Pot was captured, sentenced to life imprisonment, and placed under house arrest. While he officially died of heart failure, an American journalist present claimed that he had taken his own life when threatened with being tried by the US. Number 2. Jack the Ripper. This list wouldn't be complete without the famed Ripper. Active from 1888 to 1891, Jack the Ripper was responsible for the passing of a number of women in the Whitechapel area of London. The actual body count is strongly debated, as the original 7 victims were part of the Whitechapel killings, but whether or not the Ripper was responsible for those is unknown. 5 victims have been confirmed to have been his work: Marianne Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Edders, and Mary Jane Kelly. There were several other victims after these: Rose Milett, Alice Mackenzie, the Pinchin Street Torso, and Frances Coles, though their relation to the Ripper is also unconfirmed. Other killings could have been attributed to the case, but due to its high-profile nature, the police had to suspect that copycats may have come into play. In the end, Jack was never found, and his victims' families never saw justice. Despite this, Jack the Ripper has been immortalized in countless fictional settings and media, which may have been what he wanted in the first place. It may seem easy to place this man at the top of the list, but in a day and age where his ideas are beginning to spread through the Western political landscape again, it must be stated with absolute certainty that this man was utterly vile. His rise to power has been thoroughly documented. The leader of a homegrown fascist movement that utilized perceived losses of a cultural war as fuel for their takeover. Once in power, he led numerous movements poised at dividing and separating the populace through a regime of hate and misinformation. Appealing to his followers, this man thrived through fanaticism. This man forced his way into office through bullying, threats, and intimidation of both himself and his party members. This man has never gone to prison. Who is he? You already know.